the Lord provide you with the gifts that you need according to the circumstances in which you're living. The freedom to rejoice, to be happy. If your life is going like that, the freedom to rejoice in your husband or your wife, your children, your parents, your family, the good health that is yours, the kindness and good neighbors that you live around, the peace, social, and the like. That is your situation right now. Don't regret these. Don't regret the things that make you smile and you get them and they come your way. Don't regret having them because others don't. You will be saddened at times that there are multiplied millions who don't know what you know. But there's some things you can do. You can't do everything. You cannot do everything. You can do some things. And the things that you and I can do, we ought to get on and do them. But when you pray, and you're the kind of people who do that, you don't always pray just for you. If you're anything, and I'm taking it that you are, most of those who would listen to this kind of thing regularly, you're like Christ and want to be more like him. If you're anything like him, you look at the world and you feel your sadness. Don't regret that either. And should it be you're wrestling with things that trouble you terribly and they shouldn't be in you, and you wish, I should do better. Don't regret that either. Don't regret feeling guilty unless it becomes phobic, unless you become obsessed with it, and then that's over the top. When it becomes the dominant thing in you, the Christ then is sidelined, isn't he? The Spirit of God is quenched like a fire that is being put out. So, I was talking to someone just several days ago, and we were talking about what we should be. Listen, see, I know this, what I'm about to tell you. It's not easy to feel it and live it out now and again, but it's more difficult. We were talking about how we want to be better, and the phrasing was used a number of times. I should be, this person said, I should be better than this. When you say, I should be a better man, I should be a better woman, you're talking about a non-existent person in those moments. I am not what I would like to be, the one I would like to be, the one I should be, doesn't exist. I dream of him. I long for him. I want to be him. He does not exist. And so to live a should-be sense is to live what you're not. Just apologize to God for that which hurts your heart because you know it makes him sad. But don't apologize about where you are now in your hunger and your longing. This person that you now are is the only one you've got. Thank Him for that. Thank Him for embracing you, loving you, and working with you. This I tell myself, of course. And so, here I am, we say to Him. Here I am, the one I am. The one I long to be is in the future. That is, what I'm longing for will one day be fulfilled. In the meantime, I'm not that person, but Holy Father, I'm grateful you receive me as I am and helping me to become what one day I not only will hope for, one day I will be. So, whoever you are, whatever you are, if you're Christ's, rejoice in what you can rejoice in. Don't be ashamed of it. Don't regret it. Don't think I shouldn't have this joy. Enjoy it. Your food, your home, your job, your health, all those lovely things, for they are gifts of God. God left Himself not without witness, in that He did us good, gave us harvests, and gave us gladness to fill us. Acts 14, 16, 17. We're back in Acts chapter 24. Paul is saying, I hope in God. 24:15. There's going to be a resurrection of the just and the unjust. The just. What is it you think of when you hear the English word, when you hear our word just, or the word justice? What do you think of when you think of justice? My sense of it is that the thing that first comes to our mind, this may not be true, but I think there are grounds for saying it's very common. When we think of the word justice, we think of retributive justice, the act of punishing for wrong done. The wrong done requires justice. And what is that justice? It's retributive, punitive justice. That's a perfectly legitimate use of the word justice. But justice is bigger than that. Here is the beauty and the risk of speech, words, written or spoken. Words mean nothing. We mentioned this a couple of sessions ago, I suppose. But words mean nothing in isolation. And when we speak of retributive justice, we're setting up a setting, a mental setting. We see someone do wrong, and we see him being imprisoned, let's say, for years. Or, as most recently there, a gentleman who had been a long time on death row was executed. I'm not interested in discussing that. But I am saying when we see that kind of thing happen and someone speaks of justice, what we've done there is we've taken the word justice and we've, we've created a setting, a legitimate setting, but we have a specific aspect of the word justice. It is punishment being carried out on wrongdoing. But justice is bigger than that. It's been a few years back, but I remember, of course, vividly. In different parts of town, you would see up on the walls, painted by those who had not been treated well by the English government and those who were part of it. And though they themselves, the people who were writing these things up on the wall, they weren't innocent either. Nevertheless, they had been mistreated. And up on the walls, in a lot of places, they painted, "We want justice, not charity." In that sign, and they were all over the place, they were wanting fairness, not retributive judgment. They were not saying we want punished. They were saying we want fairness. Justice is bigger than retributive justice. In the Greek scriptures, the words that we render just, justice, justified, and the like, they all come from the same root. And when you speak of God being righteous, the temptation, depending on the text, is to think of God as a punisher of wrongdoing. I'm not interested in disputing that. I am saying that the word dikaiosune, that rendered righteousness of God, it's not just about punishment. It's about fairness. It's about doing what is right, not only in punishing the guilty, but in making a judgment, assessing. Jesus will say, "Judge not according to appearance, but judge a righteous judgment." He's not talking about punishment in that remark. He's talking about fairness. Believe this. When you hear throughout the scriptures that God is righteous, you are hearing the speaker, the writer, say that God, among other things, that God is fair. The Hebrew writer, chapter 6, I'm sure, says to them who are thinking of walking away from God and some who have walked away from Jesus Christ because things just never turned out the way they thought they should, and they suffered a good bit. The Hebrew writer says to them, "You haven't yet suffered under bloodshed." He knows who he's talking to, and he said that. He said, but, now, chapter 6, I'm sure. He said, God is not unrighteous. Some versions, I don't remember which at the minute, render it, God is not unfair. He sees what you have given up, and he takes that into account. People, do you know what's important? It's important, if you're able, if you're up to it, if you're built this way, and if you're encouraged and shaped this way, one way or another, to spend time reflecting on big, rich words, and allow the big, rich words to paint all kinds of pictures, so that we don't get narrow and become I've only one thing to say, and we become parrots. No, context. The semantics of things matter, not just dictionaries. It's easy enough to say righteous there is punishment. God punishes, therefore, every time you read the word righteous, it means he punishes the guilty. That occurs in Scripture. But context determines. But if you keep on saying that justice and righteousness is retributive, retribution, keep on saying that, and you begin to think of God as a punisher of evil. Jesus said, in a context that's dealing with marriage and divorce, and he's speaking, this is Matthew 5, he's speaking to men who dominated the show and constructed a system of marital relationships that was destructive of the marital relationship. And that's what Christ has in mind when he says, whoever, Matthew 5, whoever looks on a woman to lust after her, and the present tense of the verb certainly suggests that he goes on, this is what he wants. He's not in that context speaking of simply jumping into bed with some woman. No. He's talking about, he's a married guy, and he's looking at another woman, and he wants her, doesn't want his wife. The whole setting of Matthew 5, and then in Matthew chapter 19. He's talking about an unfair system. Yeah. And he's talking about men who don't want the wife they've got. And they want, because there's this woman down the street, maybe someone else's wife, mark you. But certainly his own wife. And I'm half sorry I started this, but in the Old Testament, adultery was narrowed down to, God did this, narrowed it down to a particular set of circumstances. And there's good reason for it. Jesus knows all about the text that I am thinking of. And he says, the Old Testament, the one I read is the one you read, and it's okay. A husband could go lie with a prostitute, and it's not in the Old Testament text and Mosaic law, it's not adultery. It's adultery if he lies with another man's wife. How do I get into this? Let me drop that right now. Here's what I meant to say. I was talking about God's fairness. Oh, you see what I just said there about all of that marriage and divorce thing in Matthew chapter 5 and 19? If you need to write me, I'm your man. Write me and tell me. I don't believe that, and we'll talk about it. Or write and say, where'd you get that from? And you and I can have a little dialogue. Now, I'm done with that. I'm back to what I wanted to get. I was talking about God's fairness. Jesus attributes to a man who's thinking and doing evil. He attributes adultery to a fellow who thinks and cherishes the thought of adultery. He says you've already committed adultery in your heart. Before you ever jump into bed with someone, He said, you've already done it. Because you cherished the want to do it. He said, if you're angry at your brother without a cause, we're not talking about my speech is going, momentary. We're not talking about momentary anger where, no. He's talking about maintaining this bitter anger to your brother. If you've done that, if that's how you feel about him and you maintain that and cherish that, you're a murderer. He attributes the cherished inner thought. No apology, no, I wish I wasn't feeling this way. Nothing like that. Cherishes this. He attributes that to the person. You've done it. It's who you make yourself to be. Is he that way about evil things, but not that way about fine, wonderful things? If you cherish, you blunder around like everyone else. We long for better, that which pleases him more, that which pleases him more consistently, that which is within us that denies the right of this ungodliness to be in us. We deny its right to be there. We are filled with remorse. We would be rid of it if we could. Like that. Because we want to please him. Jesus, who attributes to the one who cherishes and holds on to his evil, he attributes that to him as acting it out. You've done it. Does he do that with someone whose heart, whose inner world cherishes the better, the lovelier, the finer, the truer? Or is he just this punitive? If you think he's only punitive, your God is way too small. In the book of Luke, 22, verse 28, something like that. He's looking across. These fellows are arguing about who's number one. This is the night in which he's going to be betrayed. And finally, he says something to them about all of that, and then he says of them in Luke 22, you are the ones that have stood by me in all my trials. How could he do that? How could he do that? These fellas, I mean, every now and again he'd go, oh, he rebukes them for their unfaith, rebukes them for this and that and the other. He knows how far they've fallen short. And yet he looks at them and says, you're the ones that have stood by me in all my trials. How can he do that? Well, he's telling a lie. He's telling a lie for a good reason. Jesus doesn't tell a lie for anything. He doesn't worship honesty. He worships his Father. And as a consequence, he is honest as the day is long. But he looks at them and believes, sees them, knows them. He looks at them, sees and believes that if they could do better, they would. And he credits to them what they cherish of loveliness and kindness. Yeah. Big words. Hope, righteousness, compassion. Just name the words. And as soon as you name a word, you don't see the image, of course. Well, not always anyway. But you create a setting. You can't think of somebody being compassionate without, seeing or thinking of an event that you saw. Yeah, that's it. The sound, the word, the sound. Compassion. The sound. Just. The sound has to be contextualized, because the sound describes an event. You see me beat the blood out of some senior citizen in some shop hallway. You have a word for that. Brutality, cruelty, whatever, you see. But that word that we used about what I have done here, that sound, that word that we all agree that describes that, it came out of, grew up out of a life event, a reality that occurs in people's lives, in their behavior. And we made up words. They developed over the years. We made up words to cover an event. We got the words. The words became ours because we've seen and heard events outside of ourselves. Context, realities, whatever the reality is. If you see somebody being hospitable, you don't use the word cruelty. Why is that? Because the words relate to life as life is, the reality of life. Yeah. Don't depend merely on words. Use your imagination. Use your imagination. Watch good movies if you're a movie watcher. Read good narrative literature if you happen to be a reader. Read poetry. Can't read it all because sometimes it's just over our heads, those of us who are not poets. But there is great poetry that paints images. We see scenes. People, they give us the capacity to imagine. And then the words, we begin to see, well, that word doesn't cover the whole thing. And do you know, without arrogance, without strutting or being swaggering types, we become very smart. I would become smart. If I get the help to do all of this, I begin to see life bigger, lovelier, or uglier, if it's the case, you see. All of that. We need to help one another do all of that. And if you're a teacher and a preacher, God help you to commit to helping people see the world as God would want them to see it more and more. That's your business. Your husband? Okay. Are you a father? Okay. Are you a neighbor? Are you a dentist? Are you this, that, and the other? Wonderful. If you're a minister of the Word of God, that is your job. God bless you in it. God bless us all according to our needs. Thank you.